drama, another kind. Let's see, it's stealing from Kunchu. Kunchu is stealing from something else. So it goes way back, right? You can see the dynasties up here, the Yuan dynasty, Ming dynasty, Qing dynasty up there, okay? And so we're talking about indigenous Chinese theater, Qi, opposition to spoken drama, which came in end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, where they didn't sing. And the Chinese thought that was very strange, so they had to call it spoken drama, okay? And then there's how many kinds of this type of theater? Some people say over 300, right? But it's not very scientific. Every group wanted their own, right? So there would be an Ann Arbor theater tradition too, right? So anyway, how do we get all these kinds of theater traditions? Is that in China, geographical isolation, early times communication was not very good. And so you have local dialect, lots and lots of dialects, and those two would go together with the music that fit the local dialect, produce a local form of Shichu. That people would feel like it was theirs, the same way they felt like if they went into the capital and talked to somebody from their hometown, they talked the same dialect. And so and then there's also one of these forms might become a national form, right? And the process would be that it would be taken up to the capital and the court would patronize it. In the case of Kunchu coming from the south, it was brought up the Grand Canal, not only for the emperor's delight, but also all these civil service examination takers would go up to the capital, and they want to hear Kunchu up there. So here's our Grand Canal, Suzhou, the home place. Kunshan is right next to Suzhou, Kun Opera. And so they would take it up the Grand Canal to Beijing, a long place away, right? The Grand Canal is important because there's nothing to eat in Beijing, right? You have to move everything you want to eat up there, right? And so powerful Qing emperors, such as the Kangxi Emperor and the Qianlong, they like to make tours of the south. They got to know Kun Opera, and they brought Kun Opera back to them. On their tours, there would be all kinds of performances set out for them. Like, you know, the locals would bring out their TV sets and show their favorite TV programs to them. And so again, the Kangxi Emperor here and the Qianlong Emperor down here. They reigned a very long time, right? He was still going at 60 years, didn't want to surpass his grandpa, so he actually abdicated. So Kun Opera, we're talking more of a chamber style of opera, good for inside, and so for private performances like this. This is a Qing Dynasty palace illustration of a naughty Ming Dynasty novel where the family is rich and they would bring in troops to perform for them. And then this is within the palace, a very intimate theater, right? Has a lot of trompe-l'oeil stuff here, makes the space seem bigger than it actually is. So that's Kun Opera. And so the supposed birth of Peking Opera, often said to be 1790, because it was Qianlong Emperor's 80th birthday. He brought all kinds of troops into the capital, and they would perform outside for everybody to be able to see, right? And a lot of people think that there were 4 troops that came there, but actually only 1 came up from Yangzhou, and they were called Huiban because they were coming from Anhui. But actually what happened is that, remember that Peking Opera is stealing stuff from everybody else, and has to put it all together so it makes sense, so it takes a while. So not until the middle of the 19th century do we have something that we could really think of as Peking Opera. So here we have, the emperor had money, right? Especially in the Qianlong reign. And he could have like boats on stage. He could have theaters with 3 different levels, with heaven up here and stuff like that. Here they're celebrating with a play the amalgamation of Taiwan into the Qing Dynasty empire. They have the emperor way over here. I hope he has some opera glasses so he can see, right? People are not watching, they're just bowing to the emperor at this point, right? So what I want you to keep in mind is that lots of money, lots of scenery. They had all the money they could want. But with Peking Opera, you have troops that had to go from a performance place to performance place. Everything they need for a performance they had to carry with them. So it had to be very simple. And so everybody talks about 1 table and 2 chairs. You don't see any chairs in these 2 particular ones, right? But the idea you make do with a very small amount, the principle of economy. These are paintings from the palace. And so Peking Opera was brought into the palace. Cixi Taiho, the Empress Dowager Cixi, I'll introduce you, was a really big fan. This guy over here, some of you might have heard of, this is the Monkey King, but his face pattern is more simple than it got to be later on. This looks like a good guy to you? And so there are actually face patterns for this guy where it's more asymmetrical than this, right? This is a play that was changed after liberation, made him into a good guy, and gave him a better face pattern. And so the emperors we want to think about with Peking Opera are the Shenfeng Emperor. And so he died in 1861. He's the first one to bring Peking Opera into the palace. And then the emperors after that, Dongzhi Emperor and the Guangxu Emperor, were basically controlled by Empress Dowager Cixi, who was a consort of the Shenfeng Emperor. Right? Shenfeng Emperor was on the throne very briefly, right? How many of you seen The Last Emperor? Yeah, it's all about him, right? Ooh, poor guy, right? So here is Cixi, and this is her favorite eunuch, who also became important because he was an actor in the eunuch troops in the palace. Cixi liked opera so much, she actually thought that the eunuch troops they already had there weren't enough, and so she had her own. She would also bring in commercial performers. Her bad reputation, for instance, about the idea she took all the funds for building a navy and made this marble boat. Some of you have gone there, right? Looks better at a distance than when you're actually on it. Here she is. Somebody's actually stood up for her. We'll see how that works out, right? But anyway, all kinds of rumors about her having affairs with actors, which is not true, of course. All female rulers, they dumped on them that way, right? Empress Wu Zetian of the Tang Dynasty, for instance, woo, 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 woo. So anyway, Beijing theaters. This is not a Beijing theater, but you can think of this as a temple theater, right? So these are the kind of theaters where you could go in, you didn't pay, and a sponsor would spend all the money for a performance like that. Women were allowed to go to performances like this, although they were looked down upon if they went too much. During this time period when, from the 19th century on to the end of the dynasty, the Republican period, men and women were not allowed to publicly perform together. Another way that performances would happen with private. Females and males could perform privately too. This as with the other one are not necessarily from Beijing itself. And then you have commercial theaters, right? So can you find anybody who's paying any attention to what's going on stage in this picture? It's rather hard, right? So theater was actually originally called a chaguan, a place to go drink cha or tea, right? And so all kinds of things went on. Love affairs tend to be male-male love affairs. Does this stage look very big to you? Not very much, right? You might get hurt. And the orchestra is actually put on the back of the stage here. There are some stages still in Beijing of this size. And so people actually would sit this way, sitting perpendicular. This is Shakespeare's day. They talk about the pit. Same thing, these were the cheap seats, right? Notice they're sitting perpendicular, so watching is not maybe as important as it might be. This is the oldest extant stage in Beijing. It was originally part of a family shrine, and they've mucked around with it. This is what, a hanamichi. And so they brought in something from Japanese stagecraft. But anyway, you have boxes up here. Original seating was tables and chairs around down below. So the way it used to be before they did this last transfiguration of it was the boxes here, they all had doors on them. And if you sat within the boxes, you couldn't see the stage. So I asked the guy who ran the place, what the hell? He said, well, people did business there. And if they really wanted to watch the stage, they could come out and stand by the balcony and watch, right? Okay. And so music and dialect, very important. That's how you distinguish these different types of indigenous Chinese theater. And then you have early names for Beijing opera that stress the musical form, qi pi and erhuang. These are musical modes. Each of them have a set of aria types. And then for a short way to refer to it, you can talk about pi huang, and you would know you're talking about that particular form. How many of you have connections to Guangdong? And so Yueju from Guangdong is actually also a pi huang style, even though you have to listen real hard before you can hear the similarities, right? Okay? Not until the 1870s you get anybody who decides they're going to call this type of theater with a term that refers to Beijing. And it's outsiders. It's folks in Shanghai who have that idea, right? Folks in Beijing, they just talk about it as theater. Let's go see a play, right? You have early terms, English terms, Peking coming from the post office system of romanization. There's a wage out system, in which case it would be written out as this. Okay. Never surpassed Peking. When Beijing was changed to Beiping, when the nationalists moved the capital in 1928, then you start talking about Pingxi and Pingju. Xi and Ju both mean the style of opera. When the Guomindang moved to Taiwan, they continued to talk about Pingju. But they also, from the 1930s, started talking about it as a national opera. This idea of putting national in front of everything largely borrowed from Japan. Japan produced a style of opera that they could show to diplomats, and so China wanted that too. This was the title on which this style of opera was brought to Beijing, to America in the 1930s by Mei Lanfang. Okay, and so you can now check and see that Beijing opera is coming up on Peking opera, and then the transliteration, Jingju, is way behind. Whereas with Japanese theater, kabuki has just been romanized like that for a long time. So these are kind of things that people fight about. Peking and opera. Woo! It worked, right? Good. Okay, so it was the mass media of its day. Some people almost say it's like it was a textbook, the historical textbook. People got all kinds of ideas about history. And so there are many emperors, for instance, who killed everybody and helped them get onto the throne. Peking opera does what? Makes that the case for every dynasty, right? So the Manchu is very sensitive about being an alien conquest dynasty. These are the folks who ran the last dynasty, the Qing dynasty. They prohibited for a long time use of Manchu costume on stage. Toward the end of the dynasty, they said, no, we're proud. And they decided that anybody who's a northern non-Chinese, then they could be wearing Manchu dress. So here we have an example of Manchu dress. Very different, right? And so for a Han woman, what would her feet look like? She'd have bound feet if she was high enough status. They had something that would make the kind of same effect, right? And here's Sissy herself over here. And this is a painting from the palace. Notice how not very well designed, or just the idea is more is better kind of idea here. At a distance, right, this stuff is all just going to melt together, right? So anyway, not until the end of the 19th century you get contemporary events being put on the stage of Peking opera. And so it doesn't reflect what was going on in Beijing all that well until then. Now I want to introduce to you the idea of role types. And so for convenience, both from the audience's point of view and also actors' point of view, divided up. These different role types would speak differently on stage. Only certain role types would speak Beijing dialect. Everybody else is speaking a more elevated style. Here you can see how many different types of role types there might be. Right? And so these are the kind of things that distinguish these different role types. Male or female, how old or not, mature or immature, dignified or not, balanced or outsized. And so the role types that our guests today, Li Yang specialized in, they're all outsized guys. When you see him come out, you'll see he's no bigger than me. But once he gets on stage, he's big, right? Because they know how to get big. And then also with the stature of the character, whether the character is civil or martial. And then how to make those qualities clear is according to the way they speak. And so because you had males playing female parts, they would sing in falsetto. A young man whose voice is in the process of changing would have a mix of falsetto and plain voice. Level of dictions, as I just mentioned before, focus on singing versus acting. Whether the character's movements are fine and minute or big. Whether the stature of the person is big. Whether he has lifters on his shoes or not. Type of beard that people are wearing, the footwear that they're wearing, and the type of makeup. And the particular thing we're focusing on today is painted faces, patterns on the face. So very quickly to show you, these are the Laotian dignified males. Their beards are divided up into three, right? Old guys, still divided up into three, but a crooked back. Here we have a martial male role. They can wear beards. Here we have another type of martial male role. The difference between the two of them, this guy fights with his armies on his back. Each of these indicate the army. And this guy here fights more hand to hand. This is the love interest for a guy. Shall buy they are. And so, no beard, right? Does he look attractive? This is all the big thing back then, right? And here we have a martial form of that role. The king over here. And we have an old woman. She would speak with a natural voice as opposed to falsetto. And the demure, good class woman, proper woman, and then some, a little bit less proper, maybe, not yet married or recently married woman. And then we have a more flighty woman, a Huadan. Notice that you can see her feet. You think those are her real feet? They're actually simulating bound feet, right? Because the males didn't want to bind their own feet. So they would tie a piece of wood to their feet, right? And notice that, for instance, her hands you cannot see. Her hands you can see, right? And this is a later role type that combines different types. This is a martial, a female role that tends to be, this is, for instance, the white snake. Tend to be demons or deities, if you wish. And then a female general. And then we have a more of a clownish female role. There's a matchmaker there. And our painted face roles here. Anybody know who this guy is?
Monkey King.
Not quite. Anybody else? The red, right? Monkey King has a fair amount of red in his face too, right? And so this is Guan Yu, deified as the god of war, the symbol of loyalty, red loyalty, blood, right? This guy is also very loyal, but he's older, so his face has gone a little purple, right? In his youth, he might have been red like this. But this is a role type that specialized particularly in Guan Yu, the god of war. This is the role type specializes in singing, named after the fact this particular character has a metal whacker that he can hit whoever he wants with, right? A don't trade. And this is the role type that our guest today, Li Yang, specializes in. Bai jiazi means what? Is that you make yourself as big, as important looking as you can. We'll see how that works out. This is one of his favorite roles, Zhang Fei, from the Three Kingdoms period. This is a secondary type of painted face role. And then this is another character. The very first character that our guest will make up on his face right in front of you is this particular guy, Cao Cao. He has a white face, which indicates he's an assembler. Does not want you to see what he's actually thinking. Not the best of guys. Notice that this clown role here also has white in his face. There's some amount of overlap between the two. In fact, in the Ming Dynasty in Chuanqi, there was not much, in Zaju, the Yuan Dynasty, no real difference between the two role types. And then a martial role type here. And so we could go through all this detail if we wanted to, but we don't, right? And so this is, again, the role type that our guest specializes in. And just very briefly, I want to talk a little bit about, so again, remember that for painted faces, you should include the clown type as well. And the way they're distinguished is that this type is referred to big, a big painted face role, and this type is referred to as a smaller painted face role. Cao Cao actually was not entirely white like this in the beginning. When he's still a good guy, he had half white face, right? And eventually got full white like that. So in terms of earlier types of face paint, this is still extant. You can go see it. It was painted in the Yuan Dynasty when a troupe came to visit, and the advertising up here. And if we look at the detail, you can see there's a certain amount of face paint that's going on up here, Yuan Dynasty, but still not the full face paint kind of thing. The actual date is not as clear as might be. Some people think maybe from the Ming Dynasty. These are from the Qing Dynasty, more for supernumeraries. And it says over here, you're going to have 24 of these demon characters coming on at once, and this is number 21. So paint them like that, right? So they had so many, they had to keep track. So that's an introduction. And so now I would like you to help me welcome Li Yang come out on the stage. Li Yang, 什么时候开始演戏了等等？几句吧。
我从10岁开始
Started learning when he was 10.
正经的接触京剧，就开始学习京剧，进入北京市戏曲学校。
So at that time, he formally entered a school for kids, the Peking School of Opera.
经过7年的学习，就是系统的训练，97年毕业，分配到北京京剧院。
So studied for 7 years, and then was directly transferred to the biggest Beijing troupe for Peking Opera.
我的行当是架子花脸。
And so, as I said before, his specialty is in these oversized, particularly posturing types of painted face roles. 就可以了吗？
可以了吗？
好，可以开始可以动笔了吧？
现在就画吗？
可以了。
是，先。
还有呢？
先唱一段完了吗？
随便，随便吧。
行，先念一段还是唱一段？哪个音呢？
好，
好吧。
等一下我给你们介绍一下。
好。
So before he starts, because it won't be easy then, he wanted to sing a little piece for you as Cao Cao, the first character that we're going to deal with. 来出戏的。
那就长坂坡吧。
And so the story, of course, is the Three Kingdoms period. That's when Cao Cao comes from. And the play is just named after a place. It's like Ann Arbor, right? And there's a slope there. But people were fighting, and Cao Cao was fighting against people like Liu Bei on the other, eventually be on the other side.
可以了吗？
可以了。
好。西卷金香，建功勋，曹文当燕的臣，全曹必。
Parts, right? The first was called a yinzi. It's an introductory part that would not be sung accompanied by musical instruments, right? As opposed to regular arias. And so this, for an important character when they first come out, they will do that. It's a mixture of kind of recitation and then almost singing out the lines. And the very
Rolston has introduced all the different colors. There's a color palette, color pattern identifying different people's characters. Cao Cao in this performance refers to a cunning, wicked figure, so that's why the white color refers to this beguiled, like bad character, like wicked and smart, like a strategist.
So the particular white that's used on Cao Cao's face is not a glossy white. So there's a distinction between a flat white and a glossy white. Flat white, people, be careful of. Glossy white, it's okay.
对，还有一种油白。
是粉白、油白，
对对，
不一样。
就咱有一个脸谱，有一个就跟介绍脸谱颜色的那么一个口头语儿似的，叫红中紫笑，黑正粉老。
There was like a kind of colloquialism speaking about the face pattern. Like Professor Rolston introduced, the red color refers to the loyalty, and 红中粉笑. The purple color means the like you are very filial to your parents. You are you can take care of your parents when they are senior. 然后是
红中紫笑，黑正粉老。
When the character is painted with black color, it means honesty. And when it's painted with when it's been painted with pink color, it means it's a good, honest person.
对，完了是这个水白就是很种水白奸邪，油白狂傲。
Also, in terms of the different shades of the white color, there are also minute differences. If it's like really white, like flat white, that is like not yeah.
Better.
It means not that too bad character. I think I need to take note. It's like I have to take note.
So for instance, have you heard of Judge Bao? The most famous judge? His face is largely black. The role type is called blackface, Heito. And then Zhang Fei, everybody likes Zhang Fei. He has a lot of black, a lot of shiny white in his face, right?
水白奸邪，油白狂傲，完了接着说，完了就是蓝勇，蓝色勇猛，绿色暴躁。
Oh, okay. So yeah, like the flat white refers to the wicked character. The glossy white refers to the like you are so proud of yourself. If it's painted with the blue color, it means you are so brave. You are like a warrior on the battlefields. If it's painted in green, that means you are like hot-tempered.
那黄色代表很凶狠，狂狠，灰贪，灰色代表这人有欲望、贪欲比较大。
Well, if it's painted in yellow color, it refers to it's a very cruel person. If it's painted with the gray color, it means like oh, it's greedy. So it's all these color palettes.
So it wouldn't be great if everybody out on the street, they were painted this color, right? So you could immediately tell the good people from the bad people. The question, yeah?
Is every actor responsible for his own painting?
I happened to ask Teacher Lee about this. When you're young, your teacher will paint on your face. And gradually will leave you parts you do yourself. And the goal is to be able to paint yourself. Right? And then individual actors will modify the face patterns so they fit their own face. We have another question. Go ahead.
What kind of paint they use? Is it homemade or they make it?
Different kinds. And so we're talking, for instance, about the flat white versus the oily white. So the oil-based one is different, right? So there's at least those two different kinds.
But do they make it or themselves or they buy it from somebody else?
他想问的是那个油彩，你自己买的，自己做出来的。
原来是做。
Originally would make it yourself, but you buy it nowadays.
最早是自己做。
Same with Chinese ink now. You buy a block, you don't make it yourself. Yes, go ahead.
How did the Cultural Revolution view this art form?
They did not use face paint, face patterns in the Cultural Revolution. Shouldn't say the Cultural Revolution, but in the model operas, that were the big thing in the Cultural Revolution. They thought that was too feudal. Yes, Nico.
Age 10 is young. Anyone, were his parents involved in Jing?
No, he's not from a family of actors. That's very common. The further you go back in time for actors to come out of families which that was their profession.
Just stay here.
Okay.
And then you can see.
Okay.
You can't move beyond that.
So anyway, I'll stay over here, I'll stay out of there. But anyway, and so traditionally actors were not well respected and they had to live together, had to intermarry, but things changed a lot after liberation. And so Teacher Lee began to go to school in the 90s. So things were very different. In the 20th century, arguably the most famous person in China was actually an actor. And he went to the US and represented the nation, right? Whereas prior to that, not good reputation. There's some actors had a second profession of male prostitution, stuff like that. So great big change, right? 李老师问你一下，你上学戏的时候，你父母的意见怎么样？
我因为是受我父亲熏陶，
他是带你去看戏的。
对，小的时候他经常带我看戏，他
但
喜欢戏。
是看戏和演戏不一样的。
当然不一样，当然不一样，当然不一样。
So I asked him what his parents thought about him becoming an actor, and he said it was his father who would take him to the theater. And then I said, well, watching and performing are two different things. So he said it wasn't a problem.
看戏很享受，唱戏很受罪。
And so to watch a play is a big enjoyment, right? But then have to perform, that's something else. On Friday, Teacher Lee was talking about how much equipment an actor like that has to carry on the stage. Up to 40 kilos. Doing all the padding, the stuff on the head, armor, and things like that. So,
完事儿，您
请问一下，粉红色的那个是代表什么呢？
这个吗？
对，
这个代表咱们人的印堂。印堂。一般戏曲里表现印堂，如果要是发暗的话，说明这个人就快去世了。
Oh, so it means he's still got some life in him. If it was painted black or dark, it means that he's going to die soon. Kind of a store of life up there. So a male martial actor always has a little triangle right there that's red. Lee 老师胡子没带来吧？没带来吧？
那位置好。
Carol, we had the beard, right? The black we had.
So Cao Cao's beard is pretty big. It's not as big as Guan Yu's. Guan Yu's is really, really big. In fact, he's known Mei Ranzi. He's known as a guy with a really beautiful beard. But Cao Cao's is quite big. And Cao Cao is a prime minister, and he is actually, what he eventually is able to do is to capture the Han Emperor and hold him as a hostage. So 3 kingdoms means what? There you're talking from when the 3 different kingdoms declared kingship, which was in 220 AD. But actually there's a long period before that, as different rivals were trying to set up their kingdoms. Cao Cao actually died before there was the state of Wei, one of the three kingdoms, and his son became the first king or ruler of the state of Wei. So I knew he was a prime minister all the time, so he's always wearing a prime minister's hat with wings on it. If we had multiple screens, I could be showing you pictures of Cao Cao in full dress.
Can you ask Liang what he would think if women were allowed to participate in jing?
Actually, you know what? There are female performers of even the jing role.
Really?
Yes. And so you wouldn't expect that because the voice is so big, everything is so big.
Is that recent or?
Very prominent after maybe the 80s, you could say. 他问的是女华年，比方说台湾出了一个，大陆也出了一个，叫什么纪晓云吧？
对。
对。And so there's a couple, and also, for instance, perhaps the most famous Hualien actor, babyface actor of the 20th century, Qiu Shengrong, had a daughter who could sing too. And so, and this is very common. It was, of course, more common for males to be performing female roles in the beginning, but also very common later on for females to perform male roles. Partly, like in Taiwan, because not so many males wanted to become actors. They would become engineers or something like that. But now there are also some famous female performers of Lao Shang, or dignified males. So you can see the size of that beard there, right? Wow. And because it's detachable, we have plays in which people's hair goes white overnight. There's a famous play with Dao Guan, where this guy is waiting to be able to get out to the pass, and then overnight his hair gets progressively whiter. For what? To buy a beard?
No.
Oh. Let's say things have changed a lot, right? And so in the Republican period, stars were the big deal, and they would earn a lot of money. People, I mentioned Mei Lanfang before, a lot of people would complain that his tickets were too expensive. He should make his tickets less expensive, right? After liberation, then the gap between stars and regular actors, less and less and less as time went on. To a certain extent, it's changed a little bit now, but we still haven't got back to the star system, right? Also, another thing to keep in mind is that this is no longer a type of theater in which if you perform every night, you can make money every night. For a long time, they're actually saying the more you perform, the less money you earn, because you can't keep up with expenses. That's because the main audience has gotten too old to come out, and young people have other things to do besides going to see Beijing Opera. So if you're thinking of career choices and you want to get rich by becoming a Beijing Opera actor, you might want to think again. When I was in Taiwan in the 80s, I worked in an opera school. The vast majority of the students there were interested in getting into film rather than to perform opera later on. The audience was always, of course, bigger in the mainland. So still today, there are performers who are extremely well known. Perhaps the most famous is Zhang Guoting, of younger actresses, and she performed at Lincoln Center in 2015. She has a very strong core of fans. Guoting, Guo means fire, Ding is a kind of ordinal. If you put those together, you get the word for Deng, meaning lantern. And so all her fans, they call themselves Deng Mi, because they're her fans, right? A joke. Not the best joke, but a joke. Li Yang呢？你自己觉得曹操是好人是坏人？
其实我觉得在历史上来说，曹操应该是一个军事家、政治家，又是诗人，挺全 面的这个人。
And so in terms of the historical Cao Cao, Teacher Li was saying that he's a very important, very well-rounded type of person for that time. So what happened is, how many of you know the novel, The Romance of the Three Kingdoms? It's a very popular novel. A lot of the plays in Beijing Opera come from that novel. And that novel is very strongly on the side of Liu Bei, who presumably was trying to reestablish the Han Dynasty. The very famous Neo-Confucian, Zhu Xi, was of the same opinion. Up until Zhu Xi's time in the Song Dynasty, people thought that it was the Wei Dynasty that had the transmission because they ruled the central plain. Somebody else who liked Cao Cao is Mao Zedong. So Mao Zedong thought that Cao Cao was a strong kind of guy, just like himself, right? But Mao Zedong also liked the first emperor of the Qin Dynasty, and who married people and burnt books and so forth. Recently, there was a more complicated play about Cao Cao. It was called Cao Cao Yu Yang Shou. So two different characters, Cao Cao and Yang Shou, that tried to present a more complicated version of Cao Cao. So Cao Cao was excellent at getting people to work for him, but also quite suspicious of the people who did work for him. Yang Shou was the example of that. Eventually, Cao Cao executed Yang Shou. Yang Shou is a very talented person.
怎么拼早早？
Oh, 要拼起来. And so C-A-O, C-A-O. And so Cao is a common surname, and then his personal name Cao is a different character. Oh, 干完了。好。Hello， 你好。呀，我一样吧。这些条纹呢，代表什么意思呢？
就是咱们人都有这个。
Right. And so that's making use of the actual.
If you can come out. Come on.
往前走，因为这个怎样？ Now these lines are emphasizing lines that are already in your face. So Kabuki, for instance, uses that type of face space that's more interested in what's going on in the original face. 这一点呢？
It's like the mold.
痣。那人家本来有吗？
那不知道。
Phoenix corner eyes. But what Teacher Li was stressing is there's certain aspects of Cao Cao's face that are similar to Guan Yu's, unexpected. 关羽的话，他的脾气很大，早上也是脾气很大。
脾气也大。
对 ，and so the temper was big too. Guan Yu, for instance, was very pissed if anybody would kind of intimate that there was another general as big as him. If you heard of such a thing, immediately wanted to go fight that guy. And so at least Guan Yu is more straightforward, whereas Cao Cao is really a strategist. So it's about 有计划。
对。
胡子能放上去吗？
可以。
给我挂了。
Is it real hair or?
是真的是假的呢？真的假的？ So he said, not real hair.
It's fake hair, right?
Fake hair, yes. Originally, of course, it would be real hair, horse hair or something. That is maybe. Wow.
张飞啊，会有这样的动作。
So certain faded face roles will throw their beards around. Cao Cao no, because he's a prime minister after all, right? Anything that anybody would like to ask Cao Cao?
可以，有卸妆油，卸妆油。
So talking about how to take the facing off. So there's special.
专门的卸妆，多少也有受影响。
So I asked him if it hurts the face. He said, yeah, a little bit.
对，多少来说。
还比以前的那个要好得多吧？
差不多其实。
No progress.
No progress.
差不多。
好了 Okay, and so teacher Lee now has to 卸妆。
Sing, he has to sing the same.
好，
还要唱那个，还有曹操那个。
来继续。OK， 来继续。
还是刚才那个。
哦，是上班活。
或者换一首也可以。反正学生会变成唱，刚才不是念了？对，现在变成唱。好。因为说一声改成唱。
Okay.
刚才是念。
Yeah, originally we planned out to reiterate the same process, narrating the same melodies again, but now we will start to get the artist to sing, to vocalize the part.
So for the first thing he sang before, he didn't need musical accompaniment. 陆国金念一下，给他们听听吧。
好，那就从这儿
And so there's a way to imitate the sound of the percussion orchestra.
有声音能听见吗？可以吗？
可以，要不要拿这个？
况且得唱。唱起啷起，唱起啷起，唱起啷起，空起唱啷起的唱，噔噔噔噔噔一个噔。同雄兵下江南，哪个里个哪个东，交锋啊！ 得了那荆襄九军，大战军威，哪个里个哪个中，兵刺一过江河东，把周郎是退。这趟这趟，那是借在灭刘备，无以方遂。
So the equivalent of bravo is 好。And so teacher Lee will now take off his old face to get ready to be Li Kuei. Were you able to tell when he was singing and when he was playing like orchestra? And so there's a different set of onomatopoeics for the orchestra. There's 4 main instruments. Huang, everything's being struck at once. Tei, for instance, only the little gong is being played. Dong'er, liger, dong'er, it's the string instruments that are being imitated there. So I'm going to switch off now to our postdoc, who's on the job market presently, right? So you should, anyway, here, Andrew.
Thank you.
So, house size up a bit, please.
Thank you.
And also, if you go ahead and put the visuals on the back, I'll be looking for some stuff that we can show for the way if you like. And so, I'll give you an idea of what comfortable with that.
Yes, I thought I would just supplement with a few comments about what it would be like for you as spectators. Here we have one experience of you sitting here in the audience enjoying the performance as he prepares. But what it would have been like, this is a very different experience than what it would have been like for you had this been about 100 years ago, if we were in Beijing in about 1918 or before. So if we go back and we look at what Peking opera culture was like in the 1890s, we saw some pictures that Professor Rolston showed that had images of people sitting so they were perpendicular, and he mentioned that they were in a tea house. So when you were going to go to the opera, the kind of thing you would do, the first thing you would do is you wouldn't buy a ticket to go to the opera, you would buy a tea ticket. You would buy a ticket to get tea, so you would go in and then have there. Do you imagine that it would be as quiet now, as respectful as this audience is to the young, do you think, or do you think it would be noisy? Noisy, it is definitely noisy. You see people drinking tea, they're eating peanuts. There are people who, because it's a rather messy thing, if you got the peanuts, there are people who sell towels, so that you have people going around selling towels. Well, how do they get the towels to the balcony? They have to throw them, so they have to throw the towels up in the air. How do they get the tea to the people who are sitting in the middle aisles? They have to have a really long spout on the tea kettle in order to get the tea into the people who are sitting on the inside. And this is a very popular pastime, so these places are usually packed. We've got the people who are doing business in the balconies. You have the people who are coming to enjoy tea, who are there in the middle. And this is the kind of event that takes place all day, and as soon as we get lights for it, all night as well. But in the meantime, this is the kind of thing where you could conceivably buy your ticket, go in, sit down, and spend the entire day watching opera. Does that mean that it's one play? How do you think they figured that out? In general, they had more than one play. So you would have a series of plays, a medley of performances that you would have over the course of the day as people were performing. So some of them would be more martial performances, and then as the evening wore on, sometimes I think what they would do to try and get audiences to go home is they would switch into the high romance and melodrama, so that you would have people coming on stage and singing these long romantic arias to sort of lull you to sleep, so that you have the hint that it was time to leave the theater and go home. So you had all kinds of experiences of when you were going. But then, of course, we now see the theater in this way. We all sit in rows facing the stage, and everybody can see the stage equally, whereas that was not really the case in the 1920s, or before that one, rather, in the 19-teens and late 19th century. And that reflects, in part, a change that happened during the 1920s, whereas before what you would do is you would go to listen to opera. In the 1920s, you would go and you would start to watch opera. So there's a shift in regime from listening as being a kind of oral art to one that's being a very visual art, one that's very vision dominated. So one of the first things they did is they changed the theaters. So they rebuilt the theater, so you're no longer going to a tea house, and you no longer have a stage, the projection stage that comes out like this and has the pillars that can block the view. They switched to a stage that is more flat, a proscenium stage like this, and they have audiences that are arrayed in rows so that everybody has an equal democratic viewing chance to see the theater and enjoy it equally. It also became no longer such a good idea to eat in the theater. They wanted to keep the theater clean. They wanted audiences to be respectful. However, do you think they really succeeded in getting rid of the howl? No, exactly. In fact, there are stories of confusion when people first started going to the movies, because in the movies it was clear that you needed to be quiet. But if you saw something that you liked, the tendency was to say, oh, well, we want to say how. We want to say that there's some kind of, respect for the good performance that was on stage. So saying how became this thing that they hang on to. And in spite of changes in the 1950s where sometimes it was less okay to say these things out loud, now when you go to the theater in China, perfectly okay to say how, and people do it on the regular. And you listen to the music and you listen to where the line stops, and that's where you issue your howl. There's also such a thing as the sarcastic howl. So be careful with your howl. Make sure it's the right kind of howl that you're encouraging the performer. So, thinking then about how much has changed today, how much it's different from before, I see that we are still waiting on Liam to return, so I will keep going. What we have is, in the contemporary period, is a similar kind of experience of noise that has come back to the theater. So whereas in the 1950s it was more about having a very quiet audience, and you can see films from the 1950s that show audiences sitting very respectfully, very quietly, until it is exactly time for them to applaud, and then they burst into exuberant applause, and it goes on at great length, but they're very quiet up until that point. That's not really the case when you go to the theater in China today. Today people don't, like before the show today, we often tell people, turn off your cell phones, please turn off your cell phones. They don't do that. There's no need to turn off your cell phone. In fact, you may have a conversation on your cell phone. You may need to have a conversation. This is historically a place where you would do business, and it is to that extent today. You can still go to the theater with someone who you're trying to make a business deal with, and engage in business and engage in the same kinds of activities that took place 100 years ago. The other thing that I find really interesting is that it used to be the case that food was not allowed in the theater in the middle of the 20th century. But I personally have witnessed going to the theater in Beijing when it is the national troupe, and the national troupe of Beijing Opera is extremely renowned and extremely popular. And so when you go to see them, it's usually standing room only. Every seat in the auditorium is taken, and everybody, you have to pay your dues when you're going to do that. You have to be willing to sort of stand in line and get the ticket in advance and be sure that you've got it and get into the theater. In other words, you may not have time for dinner. So what I have seen is that people come in, and as everybody is worked in, and we're all settling in, and the show has begun, I've seen the McDonald's man come in from downstairs, come up to the balcony. He brings over the delivery. He sends it down the row. So just like they do, just like with the long tea kettle, this is the modern day equivalent. It's the McDonald's guy delivering the French fries and the shake to the people in the audience. So it does still occur to this day. I have witnessed it personally. So let's see. Another thing we can talk about are sort of the experience of being in troupes and performing in the 1920s. Because just as Professor Rolston said, the tickets for the stars are extremely expensive. So if you're just an average Beijinger and you don't have that kind of income, when you are going to the theater, actually you're probably going to go not to one of these super fancy stages, the proscenium stage. You're going to go to one of these stages, the traditional stage with the projection stage, and you probably won't be seeing the major stars. You'll be seeing the female performers instead. And so starting in the 20th century, they had performances of all female troupes. And sometimes for a brief period of time they had mixed gender, but that didn't last as long until the 1920s. So they went back to having split troupes. So they would have all female performers on stage, and that is the kind of performance you would be likely to see as an average person in Beijing in the 1920s. But certainly acrobatics are very popular, and if you were in Shanghai or if you lived on the outskirts of Shanghai, you would have a chance to maybe go and see the troops as they traveled down the river. And so you had the troops that would come from Beijing, they would bring their performances and they would travel down the Yangtze River, stopping in each port along the way, and they would perform. And these stages are quite small. So as they are getting into the show, the martial arts performance, the performance of the jing, is actually quite challenging, because these stages are not big at all, and especially if they're right on the water, there is a very good chance that you can take a flip and go right overboard and right into the river. So this has gone from being a rather dangerous, rather difficult kind of form of profession to something that has quite a bit more respect and quite a bit more ease now that we have a nice proscenium stage and a nice set of rows of seating for people to enjoy. But I encourage you to please continue to say ha to show your respect. Thank you.
李老师，你可以去了。And so, no more talk. So, does this guy look like a prime minister to you? So this is not how he appears on stage, but this is his character. And so he has two axes, And also he's showing a fair amount of his chest. You're not going to see Cao Cao's chest, right? So we're not going to take any extra time. Well, verbally let you know a little bit more about Li Kui. But anyway, 李老师可以开始画了，是不是要来一点李逵样子的？好。So， 蛮熟悉的。And so there's a play in which Li Kui goes to see his mother. He's already a bandit. He wants to bring his mother back to the bandit camp. Doesn't work out so well. But it'll be before that. And so, oh, and so this is when this whole story of the play is that Li Kui wants to go home. His boss, Song Jiang, is worried that Li Kui likes to 喝酒. And so he says, you cannot drink. So of course he drinks, right? And so forth like that. But anyway, the part he's going to 唱的吧，就是那个。And so the part that he will perform is after he's left the bandit camp and he's looking at the scenery. And so you saw the guy, right? Does he look like a poet?
No.
But he's actually describing the scenery with very flowery language. And in this particular place, 是元法剧借过来的词儿，对，本来那个李逵附近的那个，对。
等于是李逵他们是剧作家孟宏东先生，他根据原先跟笔先生创编的这个书写，
所以有些东西就透出来。
哎，对。好吧，可以了。
好吧。
魏老师稍微往前一点，因为刚
对。
这儿，对对对，因为那个不到你，对对对对。
好，那我就不用再动了吗？要不有点动作。
反正想个办法要大大的做上这儿。
这个可以了吧？ OK 了吧？乐杀人的夜，吧噌噌能起来，噌能起来个噌，噌能起来个噌能起来个噌能起来，噌能噌噌，噌能起来个噌能起来个噌能，噌能起来个噌能，噌能起来个噌能起来个噌。 蹭能起来个蹭能起来个蹭，蹭能起来个蹭能起来个蹭能起来个蹭能起来个蹭，蹭能起来个蹭能起来，蹭来吧蹭蹭蹭，高高兴兴下三更，回他家去探老娘。得。 戒修人性，我不闯祸，这面慎言经典方。
So I told you he promised not to drink, and so he is thinking of that promise. He's still good at this point, but a little while then, 碰到酒就喝了，是吧？下一步呢？
下一步是交方了。好，
有了 ，OK。So anyway, I can tell you a little bit more about Li Kui as you're watching about the face painting. And so, if you remember Cao Cao, for most people, is familiar from a novel. Li Kui is the same. Li Kui comes out of a novel called Shui Lu Zhuang, The Marshes. The idea there is that loyal people have been forced to go to the marshes instead of work in the capital. There's a Chinese phrase, 闭城两山, to be forced to go to Yangshan. The idea is it's what happens to good people when the government is not correct. 李老师，
哎，到。
你有话说的，你跟他说，我会马上打个岔。 但是我现在还是讲李逵。
哦，你讲您的，您讲。
啊 I got permission. Anyway, so the novel is about these outlaws, and then the idea is that originally they are evil spirits that were captured by Taoists and then put under a stele, and a bad official came along, let them all out, and Zhang is the leader of this band. And there was a famous commentator on the novel who liked to pair Song Jiang, the leader, and Li Kui together. Li Kui is extremely straightforward. He lives in the moment. If he sees a fault, he'll kill you first. It's like a 先杀人, sai dating. And so first he'll kill you, and then he'll ask whether he had the right idea or not. And so the play in which teacher Li was performing a piece from is precisely that kind of story. In that play, Song Jiang and somebody else, there are people who are pretending to be them, and they go to a tavern and they try to steal the daughter of the tavern keeper. So these are not the real Song Jiang and the real Wu Yong, but they are bad people. Li Kui comes and he hears this story and he thinks it's true. So he goes back and yells at his sworn brother, Song Jiang, and so forth. And then he eventually finds out that he's been a little hasty, and then he has to go and capture these people. And then he comes back to apologize. The original name of the play was Li Kui Fu Jing, and so he carries a stick to beat him with when he first comes back. And so you could say that Li Kui is kind of like a berserker character. If I had access to be able to show you a slide, I could show you a scene from the novel where he goes into battle naked with his two axes, and he cuts everybody out, right? On the other hand, very early on, there was a certain attraction of that kind of not thinking about things, but doing things in the moment. And so during the Ming Dynasty, people were calling, for instance, a Huo, a living Buddha. We would kind of caution our children from hanging out with Li Kui, perhaps. But anyway, extremely popular. Anybody have any questions about Li Kui? So he's a bandit figure, right? So he's not going to be a prime minister. He will be dressed in a very different way. He carries around these two axes. There's also a scene that was worked into this play called Tenjiao Li Kui. And so there's somebody who has been pretending to be Li Kui in order to rob people, and Li Kui bumps into him. In that play, both the true and the false Li Kui are played by the same type of actor, typically by good actors. And so some people thought that one Li Kui is good, two Li Kuis is even better. And so the false Li Kui tries to steal money from the real Li Kui. That does not work well, because the real Li Kui beats him. But then, when Li Kui asks him, well, why are you doing this? And the false Li Kui, who's actually named as Li Kui, Kui meaning demon. What parent's going to name a kid demon? But anyway, Li Kui asks him, why are you doing this? And Li Kui says, to support my old mother, which is precisely, Li Kui himself, of course, on his way to get his old mother to bring her back. And so Li Kui says, you're a good fellow, I'll give you all the money I have. And they become kind of sworn brothers. And he tells the false Li Kui to come on up to Liangshan, to the bandit there, and to have a good life. So there's that kind of story there too. So Li Kui was extremely important in Yuan Dynasty Zhaoju. He's more of a minor character in Ming and Qing drama, but especially after liberation, that kind of a forthright figure among the bandit group. He was the last to capitulate to the Song Dynasty when that offer came about. And so he's been very valorized in the PRC. So there's been more plays about him than before, and more plays about him as the main actor. He's come into his own. Anybody have any questions about the basic story or Li Kui? Or any question, whatever? Yes?
In the West, we're still going through Shakespeare and reinterpreting Shakespeare, and characters still appear in new productions and new interpretations. Is the same thing happening with all of these characters? Do they get reinterpreted, or are they part of history now, no longer touched?
There is a Chinese dramatist who's thought of as, it's kind of awkward, but anyways, a Chinese Shakespeare. His name is Tang Jianzu. His most famous play is Peony Pavilion. And that has been, especially recently, all types of different productions, anything that you can imagine, right? And so presently in China, they've been doing new productions of old plays and also adapting Shakespeare and Western plays into these particular forms. Teacher Lee specializes in traditional plays, but he has played modern plays, meaning like in modern dress with a face painting like that. He doesn't like those plays at all. They've, as said before, they were the big thing during the Cultural Revolution. But anyway, this style of drama, jing, Beijing Opera, was developed to portray a role that was already pretty much gone when it was most famous in the Republican era, which means that it's a little hard to adapt for modern life. So people don't go around with their face painted like this. They don't go around with wooler sleeves on their sleeves and things like that. And so it has been difficult to modernize Beijing Opera from that point of view in terms of form, but in terms of content of plays, there's been a lot of experiments. So there's a variety of different types of patterns. There's one, for instance, where there's a cross in the middle, and there's one with 3 parts to it. 李老师，你会那个脸是属于哪一种？是那么三块瓦的，是哪一种的？
花3块，花3块瓦。
Oh, and so Sankwai has 3 different parts, and then if it's more elaborate, they add the modifier hua in front. 哪3块？So I asked him, where are the 3 parts? And so he's showing you where the 3 parts are. Other questions, anybody? You will have a chance this semester to see Kun Opera, but not Beijing Opera. Because sitting in the front row over there is the head of the Confucius Institute, Professor Joseph Lam, who's bringing in the troupe. Joseph, do you want to say anything about that? Do we have an audience?
Sure. So April 13, the Confucius Institute and the Provost Office will be bringing a grand performance of Quanchi Opera to you. And it's free. It's April 13, and the theater is Michigan State Theater. The show is another 600-year story, very important story of Chinese culture and history. It's called the Pipa Ji, the lute. The story is about a young man going to the capital and getting success, but then because of natural and human problems, got separated from his wife, and then got another new wife, and then the old wife went to the capital to find him, and then all these romantic issues and conflicts of the old wife, new wife, rights and wrongs, responsibilities and sacrifices. So it's a wonderful way of understanding Chinese culture and Chinese soap opera. So I would encourage you all to come. And also another reason why this Pipaji is very powerful and important to do is because China, as you now know, is going through another new phase. And that is Chinese people are now very successful technologically, financially. And then the big thing they are now facing is how do we build Chinese values? What is Chinese value of whether it should be filial piety or being loyal to the country? So all these things are going on. And this is the kind of story that makes Chinese people think about what is going on with China. Now you have all the money you want, all the technology you want. So do you want to remain a good guy, the famous, the loyal son, or the good wife who stay behind and do all the household chores and let your husband go out and have fun, all that kind of thing. So make sure you put it on your calendar, April 13th. And that's a grand show. 25 people coming up for about 6 stars and a full orchestra. So, and it's free. So, and also I must say that would be the last grand show of the Confucius Institute, which is closing by June. Thank you. Huh? 7 点钟. Yeah. 7. Yeah. So make sure you come and bring your friend. We have booked a big hall, so it's 1,300 people in the Michigan State Hall, so you can bring your friend and share this wonderful experience.
So the percussion orchestra will be the same as in Peking Opera. The main instruments will be different. Flute will be the main instrument for the performance of the lute. Joseph, any painted face roles? I would think that maybe Prime Minister Niu would be as close.
There may be one, yeah.
And so it's a story about a guy who ends up married to two women, and then the husband of his second wife is as much of a troublemaker as you get. But basically there aren't too many bad people in the play, which you might find disappointing. But anyway, extremely famous play. The Ming Dynasty Emperor actually wanted everybody to perform it everywhere because they thought it would be a very moral, useful kind of play. But you will not see all 44 scenes, right? So they extract scenes.
Why the show is so fascinating now is because it is 600 years old play with all the moral problems, and there's no one person who's real bad except the father of the second wife. So, but it's not really that bad. But because of that, the story is fascinating is how do you define a character is sometimes a little bit bad, sometimes a little bit good. So that makes it, it's almost like Hamlet. And then how do you deal with this ambiguous, little bit bad, little bit good situation? So that's very fascinating. And also you will see that the Quanchi is different from Peking Opera is the music is very long. So in here you see Li Lao Shi singing one passage, maybe 1 minute or so. But in the Quanchi it's a very musical genre, it's a little bit older. So the music will go on singing at least another 1 hour will go about 10 minutes. At the same time, the action is more choreography, more dancing like, so it is quite a feat to see the people dancing and singing on, say, 10, 15 minutes. And if you know Chinese, then you will know that all the words they sing, the lyrics they sing are absolutely the first-class literature. So for a connoisseur, then you will, that pressure is not only the visual, the musical, but also the literary and the intellectual. So that is the kind of country. So you see Chinese drama, there are many kinds, fits all kinds of cases. Any questions? Yeah.
我忘记你说这个表演叫什么名字？
琵琶记。
琵琶记。
Yeah, 琵琶 is the lute. 琵琶记. Yeah.
So the female figure of that play is extremely important. So she eats husks so that her parents-in-law can eat rice. And then the mother-in-law finds out she's been eating husks, and she tries to eat some herself, and then she dies. And the father-in-law dies before too long, too. So if you're going to say it's a tragedy, it's kind of tragedy because the parents-in-law do die. 李老师画的怎么样？
快了。
我不急，没关系 ，I'm not in a hurry。有什么可说的吗？那个南边那个粉红色是那意思。
这是。
对。
这也是跟人的这个印堂一样。但是就是比一般人要夸张。
Right. And so the same as when we were talking about the spot on Cao Cao's forehead. It's the life that's in, the blood that's in Li Kuei. Is the pink in there? And remember that there's a fair amount of white on his face, but it's not the bad kind of white. A fair amount of black on his face, but it's not the, but black is okay, right? It wouldn't be okay in Western drama if you had a black face, right? Or in Virginia. If we think back for a second to the lute, that was written by a very famous literati, whereas in the early part of Peking Opera, it was the actors and people who hung out with the troops who were writing the plays in the beginning. Later on, you did have literati who were writing plays. Yes, go ahead.
But why does he have to show the blood of those three places? And it's forehead and it's two cheeks.
Well, he's actually a very lively person, right? And so it fits to show that blood.
Oh, okay.
it's not like he's bleeding. The blood is still inside. It's okay. You need to worry about him. You might have noticed that the illustration that I showed you of Li Kuei, he wasn't wearing very much, right? And I also mentioned that in the novel, he goes into battle naked. You think that's going to happen on the Peking Opera stage? No. Part of that is because, and I can't show you the pictures, is that in order to make the figure bigger, he has all kinds of padding underneath, right? These are made out of cotton padded garments to make him bigger than life. It's like padded shoulders, but to the nth degree. So if you ran around without anything up top, you'd look a little scrawny. So we don't want that. So if we go back, think about the little performance that Teacher Li did for Li Kuei when he was leaving the mountainside. You can look at that a little further. So he's coming out, he's looking at the scenery, he's actually singing very poetically. But there's also a great concern to make a big contrast between his real character and all the poetry he's just been spouting. And so, for instance, after his long aria, he stops and says, if anybody says we don't have good scenery, I'll knock his block off. And then he also looks at some flowers, and then he compares them to his dirty hands. So there's a continual effort to keep that kind of contrast going. In Yuan Dynasty, from which that play came from, the role type system was different. The main actor had to sing all 4 acts, all the song suites in all 4 acts. It was most important that that character could sing well. And so you didn't have the same kind of divisions between painted faces versus non-painted faces and so forth like that. And some of the playwrights of the Yuan Dynasty loved to play with that kind of contrast, with a person who had to sing all this poetic arias, more poetic than Peking Opera arias, and then he could be a very rough character himself. So in terms of the roughness of Li Kuei, so many of you might be more familiar with the 3 kingdoms. So Zhang Fei is a similar kind of rough character. He always says what he believes. Li Kuei is like that. They can be considered Su, very rough, but there's always an attempt to make a certain kind of delicacy within them for contrast. There's another character in the Shui Hu, or the Water Margin story, named Lu Zhishan, who ends up as a monk because he killed somebody. The same kind of idea. These people like to eat meat, even though he's a monk, he eats meat, and whenever he sees wine, he wants to drink it down. We can say that Peking Opera was interested in getting a great variety of people on stage, and also to be able to put different types of people on stage quickly. Now, if you think about having role types, doesn't it sound like it would be too stereotypical? Too much like typecasting? But these were kind of outlines or frameworks within which an individual actor would customize a role, even his own understanding of roles, so it would be his, and it would not be the same as other people's, not be the same as other characters. So part of the use of the face patterns is so you can recognize characters when they first come out on stage. Li Kuei, for instance, his face pattern is, most people will be able to recognize him immediately. And then if you don't, then look for the double axis, right? Nobody else has double axis like that. With Cao Cao, it was the white on his face. And then in other cases, for instance, if a character is a transformation of an animal or something like that, they'll paint the animal in the middle of the face so you can be able to tell. Li 老师呢？问你一下，你自己的画法有哪一些是你自己觉得是我的，我做起来的，不是向别人学的？ are certain parts of this particular face pattern that he thinks that are really his and his invention. In this particular case, he says no, he's trying to be the same as his teachers.
What are his new faces?
Carol 想问你，就是有没有你自己创作造出来的新的脸谱？你来过那个没有？
也创作过，那当然是新编戏里的人物。
So in new plays, sometimes you have to create new face patterns when there's no such one. 觉得满意吗？
我自己觉得嘛，我还是让大家觉得满意，我就满意。
And so the important part is whether the audience likes it, not whether he likes it.
Does each actor customize their paint in their own way, or are they all constant across, by role?
They want to make sure that you can recognize the character, so there has to be that much similarity. But many of the most famous performers of this role type would also have certain things that would be very specific to them. Easy example to talk about is a character named Xiao Yu, which has two characters for a long life on his forehead, on his temples. And then different people would write the characters a different way. You're sure that you know that there's all different types of calligraphy. So that would be one way, for instance, they would show off their specialness. Whereas everybody would be able to still recognize it as a character for a long life, and they would know that that was the character Xiao Yu. Certain characters, for instance, blue and green, can be switched out. How many have heard of the story of the white snake? Bai She Zhuan. So Bai She has a friend called Qing'er, and she can be performed either in blue or green. So there's that kind of overlap between the two. And so there's up to the individual actor. 画完了，好，请站起来。李逵的染口是短一点的。
李逵的染口不是满，是扎，但是咱这儿没有。
Right. So this type of beard is called man because there's no division. When I was talking about role types for the Laosheng role, divided into 3 parts. Li Kui's is different yet because it has a open part here. And so this is, most of the painted face roles will have an unseparated beard like this. And then for Li Kui, it'll be a little similar. What teacher Li has is not a black one, but a red one. And so, have you seen many Chinese with red hair? There is a member of the gang at Liangshan, he's called Chifa Gui Liu Tang. So the red-haired devil, Liu Tang. And so as soon as you see somebody, nowadays what? People are dyeing their hair all different colors, right? A lot of that came from South Korea. So the beards are very important. There are fairly few roles for the painted face that do not have a beard. You have to be quite young. And so you have the opening there in front of the mouth. 但是李逵的话，这个是又不一样的，对。
李逵是黑颜色。
给我们表演一下吧。
这个别戴了。戴上不叫玩意儿。还是刚才那个吗？
好。
好吧。来。
开始吧。
乐杀人的夜。
This is the same part you heard before, but now is it face paint on?
怎么？您说，继续吗？
继续吧。
悻悻下三更，回得家去盼老娘。戒酒任性，我不闯祸，这面甚言今殿方。啊！
And now we have one other aspect to our New Year celebration. We have a raffle, and we would like to help begin celebrating the New Year by distributing these things. We still want Leon to keep his painted face, and actually it'd be fun if he picked some of the numbers out of our basket. I also wanted to thank supporters of this, which would be of this program in bringing Leon here to Ann Arbor, to University of Michigan. So we have the Lieberthal-Rogel Center for Chinese Studies, the Confucius Institute, the International Institute, and of course the University of Michigan Museum of Art. So thank them.
You think they can hear us?
I hope so. So, and Angdong, thank you for translating as well. And, oh, he's going off stage. Okay, we will do this. Come on and bring them. Okay.
Yeah, first we will have no raffle, but basically these are tiny leaflets gifts. We will give out to
the youngest
kids.
Will the youngest
under 12?
Under 12 come on up and grab a New Year item?
Let's see how many we have.
Oh, very good. We have something for all of you.
Come on up. Wow.
Under 12, this is your moment. Awesome. Ooh.
Oh, there's Andy. Andy is the youngest one.
Oh.
Okay. We will have one more, but okay, never mind. We will have you. We will have half of you in the moment. Okay. Yeah. You were And then,
okay, David, I think you're gonna pick a number now. Now we're going above the age of 12, maybe. We'll see. And more fun New Year items. This is, isn't this always the best part? Don't you always want to be called 5999745? The last 3 digits, 745. No, going once. Here. Come on. Oh, yeah. Come on up. Solar lunar calendar, always keep on time. All right, the last 3 digits are 738. 738.
738.
Whoa! You always know where you are. Next item in that. Oh, well, this is. Yeah. All right, last 3 digits, 751. 751 for this great pair of, whoa, here you go. Hey, awesome, great. Oh, yes. It keeps going, there's more.
10. We will collect 10 altogether, so each one of you will get a beer opener with
Lian Pu on it.
We can open 10 of them.
any kind, it can open special pop too, sure. So just
10, keep
read
on.
10 numbers? Okay, people, 707, 707, 704, 704, 703.
703, cool.
Oh,
705.
705.
Here we go, elite. 712.
712.
Anyone? 712?
712?
712. We'll keep going. We've got to get rid of them all. 716. 716. Woo! Oh, and here we go. 715.
Yeah. 715. Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Honor, okay.
Two more. Okay, keep going, keep going. 723. 723. 723. That's okay. I think everyone's going to get something. 711. 711.
711.
Woo! All right, we'll keep going. How about 736? 736. Someone's being shy. Oh, and 750. 750. Yes. Keep going, keep going.
Two more.
Two more, two more. 742. 742. No. All right. 730. 730. No.
Okay, they finally.
Oh,
okay.
yes. Now we're kind of on a roll here. 731. Oh,
We
Wait.
have the best prize.
the best prize.
No, this is the second to the best.
Leading up to the best.
Piglet.
Yes, these wonderful strings of piglets that can be hung anywhere and everywhere. Okay, so two people. 731, 731. No, how about 735? 735. Yes.
This matches. Yeah. One more.
And 788. 788. Wait a minute, I want to get
Then
my
here we have.
No. Oh, good.
So the best prize.
Oh, here it is. Get pictures of all of you. Okay. Then, all right. So are we down to the final?
The final best.
The final one. Okay. All right. All right. So this is for someone to be face painted by the expert. And so we have 748. 748.
7-4.
Whoa! So, will 748 please come to the center of the stage? Okay. Thank you. We will watch an amazing transformation. And who do you want to be?
I want to be the bad guy.
So we've got a chair. Oh, okay. So this is interesting when the face painter paints someone else, because of course usually they paint themselves.
Yeah. Fire.
So if we could switch back to the camera on the face painting.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Right now. Yes.
So, Joseph, somebody was asking if you're going to sing.
I'll try. I'm such a nice person, so once in a while I want to be respected. Okay. It's cold. Are you recording this?
Yes, of course.
Good, then I can see myself.
We should really shave your head first, though. And take a toe. Joseph is a very nice person, but this time he wants to be a bad person, just for one time in this life. So Joseph has put in 10 years running the Confucius Institute. Yay! Without him, there would have been no such thing on campus. Asking how about do a half a face. There is one face pattern which is half white and half black. Yin and yang is the person who can go down to hell. Joseph, can you smell the paint?
Yeah.
Does it smell good?
It's actually quite good.
It's
The
okay.
paint is very cold, so I guess to your skin is...
Not too chemical?
No, it's not.
Good.
It's quite good.
Not like painting your house, that kind of paint.
Not that bad. Am I transforming in the bad guy now?
You look bad.
Folks, I just wanted to say this is the last thing that's happening, so feel free to go if you want, or just stay and watch Joseph Lamb transform into this other character, and to see if he sings. So,
Once he's prime minister, he might start bossing us around.
so we welcome you to stay or go as you please. Thank you. And a round of applause for all of our.
I think this is very interesting. As you paint, you get your emotion ready for the character.
Some of the patterns take as much as 40 minutes to paint. This one does not. glad it's not Halloween, right? So you all know the English phrase, speak of the devil?
Yeah.
Speak of the devil and here he comes. In Chinese, it's Cao Cao. 说Cao Cao, Cao Cao 说到. And as soon as you mention Cao Cao, there he is. In that case, it's the idea that Cao Cao is so tricky. And he loves to do ambushes and things like that. According to the Confucian understanding, your heart and how you act out should be exactly the same. Your heart and what you say should be exactly the same. The idea with Cao Cao is always supposed to be lying and tricking people, and so that's what a particular kind of badness that he's conceived of as. might make you think of somebody else. But if that somebody else does not have his face painted in that color, it's a different color. 李老师，我问你一个问题：川普总统的脸谱会什么样？川普总统，美国总统的那个川普，给他画的脸谱会什么样？是正脸呢？是白色的呢？对。
那得看在人民心目中是什么样的人。
嗯。 So I guess it'd be very polite on that one. So the question was what Trump would look like if he had a face paint pattern. In traditional theater, people, when they first come on, they'll reveal everything they're thinking, right? They speak directly to the audience, saying, I'm going to kill this guy, or whatever. But then when they see the guy, of course, they try to say, hi, how are you? So there are names for the general types of patterns. This pattern is called a Zhenglian because there's one color that's predominates white. If you remember what Guan Yu looked like, he had a red face. Another example of a Zhenglian, a so-called complete face. The more detail on the pattern, of course, the more time it takes to paint it.
Now you better listen to me.
那我们可以跟他们可以吗？
厉老师，
来到
我们可以跟他可以。
可以快走这里。
蝌蚪那个展示那个
不像嘛。
对，因为这会儿曹老师。
Wow. It really makes me feel different.
Does it?
I've never have pain on my face. This is the first time. Wow. I can see myself.
Do you want to attempt to
Save
say
it.
or
Take a
say?
picture of me.
They've been taking pictures.
No, you need to get up because we
Yeah.
have a
Pictures
tree.
of our guests.
Don't go away.
Okay.
If some of you would like to have a picture, take